So I got a few requests from people asking me about my experience before and after transitioning in a business setting. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about that. And if you guys have any additional questions, I can answer them in a future video. But I'll just give like some super quick background first, which I think I've probably said in past videos, but for context, I think it might be important. Prior to transitioning, my brother and I, my brother's partner, started an internet marketing business that we owned and ended up selling like right during the time when I was first beginning to transition. Like I came out to my brother in, I think, August or September, and then an offer was made on our business like 2 months later. And during this process, I also had to come out to the people who bought our business, because part of the deal in buying our business was that we would move cities and go work with this new company and the partners at this new company, like in their offices. So we would be working with them day to day, and it was really important to me that they know the situation. So even though I hadn't really begun transitioning fully at all, I wanted them to know that I would be on the job and make sure that they were supportive before we moved forward with any sort of business deal. So thankfully they were, and everything moved forward pretty well. I mean, the business deal ended up not being a great one, but that's kind of a side story. In the context of this conversation, it ended up working out pretty well. Like the transition was fine. Everybody was very kind to me. I can make a separate video on what it was like to transition at work, but it was relatively smooth. I mean, it was certainly like probably the most awkward experience of my life because some of the intermediate stages of transition are just really awkward times. But I was very lucky to meet my partner Kelsey there, and to also make some really good friends that had very liberal points of view and were already LGBT friendly people, and had no real problems with my transition. So that was great. But what I wanted to talk mostly about in this video was the differences between what it was like to be a business owner and to operate in a business-to-business, service-based business before, during, and after transition. And I would say, like, there's one caveat here in that before I transitioned, a lot of I guess I encountered problems that were maybe more so having to do with being like a young business owner and not really knowing a lot and just making mistakes inherent in like entrepreneurship and in operating a service-based business. And that after my transition, I had the benefit of more experience and time on the job to be able to be better at my job. So I think maybe it's not like a completely fair comparison. And if it had been essentially like the same level of experience before and after transition, maybe I would have noticed like a more stark difference. But I think like my experience helped me to maybe overcome some of the more nuanced, difficult aspects of being a woman in business. So I guess what I'll say is what you've probably heard people say and what you would expect, I think is certainly true. I think women overall are not respected in the same way. Their opinions are not respected in the same way that men's are, at least initially. So I've encountered experiences, especially with like when there are larger groups of people, especially in settings where there's like a clear hierarchy within that group of people. So I'm talking about like environments where there were like some of our clients are like Fortune 500 companies, and we're an agency, so we often are invited to meetings with other marketing agencies, and it's like a collaborative experience between our marketing agency that does a certain type of marketing work and other agencies who are maybe performing other marketing duties for the same client. In interactions that I've had with a client and other marketing agencies, I've noticed this the most, where you kind of have like this jockeying for like authority signaling or something, like, and this seems to be where I've felt most personally talked over and ignored for being a woman in a way that I didn't experience really when I was presenting as a man. I think that there was, at least from my experience, there was an assumption of more authority when I was presenting as a man versus now. I think it takes more time to speak up and articulate myself and express my opinions and express the value of my opinions and the value of my company within the context of any meeting that I'm in. Like, I always feel like I have to sort of prove myself first and maybe talk more than I would have otherwise in order to make it known that my opinions should be valued and are valuable, like above and beyond the fact that my agency is there, that I'm representing my agency. That's probably the biggest thing I noticed overall. During my transition, I honestly insulated myself from most client interactions, like, period. I was lucky enough that my brother and my partners were okay with me taking more of a background role in the business, and not background in terms of my responsibilities or my contributions, but not as much of a client-facing role, which is, in retrospect, I think I was just kind of cowardly about it. We did have, and we have had, some conservative clients who, may or may not know that I'm trans, but certainly while I was transitioning would have known. I'd say I regret that. I sort of, I could have pushed through that and maybe been like an interesting example to them of somebody who was providing value in a business and just happened to be trans, which I think could have been like a cool thing to model for people. So I regret that in retrospect. And for all of you out there who are like transitioning on the job and are still pushing yourselves to be, in large meetings with large intimidating meetings or giving presentations in front of groups of people, like, you guys deserve extra kudos for that, because that's really tough. And I shied away from it, and I kind of wish I hadn't. So above and beyond feeling like I get talked over more, and that my opinion isn't, I guess there's less of an assumption that I know what I'm talking about. I haven't noticed really anything like overtly sexist. I think people are pretty, at least in the type of business that I'm in, which is not like a super male dominated business really at all. I actually, like, my agency has like a 50-50 split between men and women, and I'd say that's pretty typical for a lot of marketing agencies. But I haven't really experienced anything beyond what I just described to you in terms of like any sort of like sexist things. There's also the other side of it too, which is that some men, I think, are a little nicer or like softer or less aggressive in their conversations, and they seem to like, they seem more trusting maybe too. Maybe that's not really a fair assessment, and I'd probably need maybe like a larger sample size or something, but intuitively it seems like that's happened. Like, I seem to have been able to create closer, more personal relationships with clients faster, presenting as a woman than I was able to as when I was presenting as a man. And perhaps that's just because I feel a lot more comfortable with myself, and I feel less intimidated by other people because I'm comfortable in my own skin. And I'm also a more experienced business person than I was when I first began transitioning, like 6 years ago now. But I think there's something undeniably different about how, especially men in positions of like decision-making power at the companies that are our clients, relate to me on a personal level. And in some ways that's made some aspects of business a little bit easier. So I guess overall what I'm trying to say is it's like a mixed bag. There's like some drawbacks and some benefits. And I don't think if you really press me on it, I'd be able to say like one's easier than the other. They're just a bit different. People approach you differently, and there are some drawbacks and some benefits to it. Now, I would like to say if I were in a field that was particularly male dominated, I think everything that I just described, the negative side of it would be enhanced significantly, and the positive side of it I wouldn't be talking about like easier interpersonal relationships, I'd probably be talking about like more sexism, and inappropriate comments and things like that. I haven't really experienced anything like that yet. Not saying I won't, not saying it doesn't happen to other women. I know it does, certainly. So I'm not trying to discount any of that. I'm just giving a personal perspective on what I feel the differences have been in a business related client facing role. If you guys have any other questions on that or my personal experience with it, I could probably go into more detail if you have specific questions, but that was kind of off the top of my head, and I wanted to keep the ball rolling with videos. And I know I took a few weeks off because I went on a road trip for the last 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. So anyway, see you next time.